Oh, my dear viewer, tell me honestly, where did this video find you? On a couch in a tiny town or in the bustling center of a metropolis? Drop a comment, I'm waiting. And let's please the algorithms together. Share this video with your friends and family. Adventure starts now. By the time Peter Daly stepped inside his house on Wednesday evening, the clock was edging toward 6. He'd tacked on an extra hour and a half at work to finish up an electrical wiring assignment that his supervisor Warren Ford had assigned him earlier that day. The extra effort paid off. He wrapped it up nearly 12 hours ahead of the deadline. Even so, his body was feeling the effects. His arms and back throbbed from pushing through the job without a break. In some ways, the timing had worked out. Grace, his wife, had left earlier that morning for a 3-day seminar in Columbus. Peter had thought about taking the day off and driving down with her, but she'd reminded him with a laugh that they already had a spring break cruise on the calendar. Everything for the trip was squared away, tickets bought, time off approved. The cruise confirmation even had its place of honor in the china cabinet, visible from the dining table. Peter noticed there were no messages on the answering machine, no update from Grace to let him know she'd gotten there safely. She'd chosen to drive the 3-hour stretch rather than catch a flight, though either would have been a fine option. He figured registration at the conference started around 7, so he decided to give her a quick ring. He pressed the speed dial on the phone mounted to the wall and called her cell. She answered almost instantly, 2 rings at most. "I was literally about to call you. It's like you read my mind," she said, sounding upbeat, with the hum of voices behind her making it clear she was in a crowded area. He wasn't surprised she knew it was him calling. The home number would have popped up on her screen. "You know we've always had that mental link," he said with a grin. "So, you made it there okay? Traffic treat you all right? Car still in one piece?" He chuckled, waiting for her usual mock-annoyed response to his gentle teasing about her driving skills. He could easily picture her exaggerated eye roll and the playful way she'd stick her tongue out, her signature move when she knew he was joking. Considering the season and the chance of slick roads, he had actually been more comfortable with the idea of her flying. Still, he was relieved she'd picked up so quickly and seemed in good spirits. "All good," she assured him, laughing softly. "Traffic was light and I had no problem finding the Sheraton. That map you printed came in handy, believe it or not." "For you, my dear, only the best," he replied warmly. "I even thought about asking Warren if I could tag along today." "What? No way!" she said, her voice spiking with alarm. She paused briefly, then continued with a calmer tone. "Peter, we've already agreed. Let's just wait for spring break for our getaway." I know. Just pulling your leg," he said with a chuckle. Didn't say a word to him, promise. That had always been the plan, even before her protest, though her reaction did sting a little more than he expected. "I'll just stay home and behave and be a good little house husband." His joking tone earned a laugh from her. "I'm glad to hear that," she replied. "It's going to be a pretty uneventful few days here. I've got wall-to-wall sessions. Even if you were here, we wouldn't have time to hang out." "So I was reading your mind," he said. "Was there something you needed to ask me?" "Oh, right. Yes," she said, glad he'd brought it up. "I can't find my travel kit, the one with the mini sewing stuff, lint brush, all that. I thought I packed it, but now I'm not so sure. Can you check upstairs? Maybe peek in the car too if it's not in the bedroom?" "Absolutely, love. Hold on. I'll grab the cordless from upstairs." He set down the kitchen phone and hustled up the steps. As soon as he entered their bedroom, he spotted the bag right away. It was perched on the corner of the tall dresser, plain as day. He picked up the upstairs handset and said, "Mystery solved. Your kit's sitting up here like it owns the place. Try not to lose any buttons or roll through any lint while I'm not there." She let out a relieved sigh and he chuckled. "Whew, that's a relief. I really didn't want to have to dig through the garage. They've got a little shop downstairs here, so worst case, I could have picked up a few things." There was a slight pause before she continued. "I've got to get going, sweetie. They open check-in early and I'm already third in line." She added quickly, "I might not get much chance to call for the rest of the week. Tomorrow I'm in sessions from 7:30 in the morning until 10 at night, and there's a formal dinner on Friday. My last workshop is Saturday morning. Then I'll drive back after lunch. Should be home by dinner time. No problem at all, babe. I put in extra hours today, and I'll probably do the same Thursday and Friday. Call when you can, and I'll get in touch if anything comes up. All right, I'll see you for dinner on Saturday night. With a few more pleasantries, the call ended. As Peter descended the stairs to hang up the phone, his mind circled back to Grace, and how she'd reacted when he casually suggested going with her on her upcoming trip. Lately, something about her seemed off. Sometimes she was uncharacteristically quiet, and other times she seemed almost too agreeable. He recalled that when they had first seriously discussed the possibility of him accompanying her, she had shut the idea down almost immediately and with surprising firmness. A loud growl from his stomach pulled him away from analyzing her behavior. Wanting something quick, he decided to order a pizza. With about 40 minutes until it was due to arrive, he went back upstairs to peel off his dirty work clothes and take a long, hot shower. Once clean, he threw on a pair of jeans and one of his many Atwood Electric work shirts, the company's emblem stitched neatly on the front. Now seated at the kitchen table with a cold beer, he was halfway through the bottle when the doorbell rang with the delivery. Sure, he could have made something healthier, but diet had never been a major concern for him. His job kept him moving, and that seemed to balance things out. Besides, Grace wasn't much of a pizza fan, so he didn't feel bad indulging while she was away. He figured he'd pack up the leftovers for lunch the next day. Most job sites were equipped with microwaves, so reheating wouldn't be a problem. An hour slipped by as he half-watched a news program, though his mind kept drifting back to Grace, particularly the strange shift in her behavior over the last few months. Something about the way she had insisted on going alone to what was supposed to be an important professional event bothered him. Grace was still a striking woman, even at 35, tall and slender, with cascading dark hair and rich brown eyes. She had recently become a sociology professor at the nearby college, a position she'd worked hard to achieve by the end of the previous academic year. She was proud of that accomplishment. As a new hire, she'd been given a heavy teaching load, though she had some help in the form of a teaching assistant. TA, she had called him. Once the fall semester began, she often mentioned how nice it was to offload grading and student meetings to the TA, a senior expected to graduate in the spring. She had mentioned his name, Adam, but Peter couldn't remember ever hearing his last name. In the beginning, she brought him up fairly often, but recently, Adam hadn't come up at all. Then, around mid-November, Grace started mentioning a few academic conferences she wanted to attend. They were scheduled between New Year's and the beginning of the spring term. The college was covering most of the expenses under professional development funding. At first, when Peter brought up the idea of going with her, she didn't seem to mind. But 2 weeks later, she told him she'd prefer if he stayed home and suggested they take a joint vacation during spring break instead. Though the change of heart irritated him, she was firm about it, and he didn't press the issue. They hardly mentioned the seminars over Christmas, and the holiday season passed without incident, filled with family visits and friendly gatherings. Peter had noticed several thick envelopes arriving in Grace's name, likely registration forms and conference materials, and she always returned them promptly. She seemed genuinely excited about the trip, even packing her bag days before New Year's Eve. Her usual attention to detail and early preparations weren't unusual, so he hadn't thought much of it. Just after 8 that evening, Peter went back to the bedroom, intending to get back to the book he'd left on his nightstand. As he entered the room, he noticed the travel bag Grace had spoken about earlier and figured he might as well return it to the top shelf in the closet, where it usually sat. As he lifted the bag, he noticed it had been resting on something, Grace's journal, a familiar item he rarely saw. Though they'd been married for 8 years, he'd only seen the journal a handful of times. She always kept it hidden away. Shortly after their wedding, he once joked about reading it, but she'd immediately shot down the idea, saying it was deeply personal, like an extension of her inner world. They never talked about it again. In all their years together, he'd only seen it twice more. Both times, she had swiftly snapped it shut and locked it before he could get a closer look. He'd assumed she wrote in it at her office, though she may have used it at home when he was out at work. Their schedules rarely overlapped. She usually got home before he left and was back again before he returned. He placed the travel bag back in its spot, but found himself unable to resist picking up the journal. It had been years since he'd held it. It was compact, about 6 by 8 inches, with a thick red leather cover and a small brass lock. As he examined it, a thought crossed his mind. Maybe the journal held clues to her recent change in behavior. Instead of putting it back, he carried it down to the kitchen, where the lighting was better. He studied the cover and the lock closely. One detail caught his eye. Only about a third of the pages had been written on. The rest were blank. That struck him as odd. It didn't seem possible that she'd used just one journal over 8 years. There had to be more. He thought about where she might have kept them, most likely in her closet. They each had their own space, and he had never once gone through hers. Driven by curiosity, he headed back upstairs to their bedroom. After a few minutes of searching, he spotted a shoebox tucked away on the top shelf in the back. Inside was a perfectly arranged stack of red leather journals. He brought the box down to the kitchen, feeling like he'd just uncovered something significant. Each journal matched the one he'd found. Same size, same look. On the spine of each was a small round white sticker, numbered 1 through 6. The one he'd found earlier, still in use, had no number. Turning one over, he noticed the name Coombs stamped on the lower back cover, a brand he knew belonged to a local specialty stationery store. And each journal had the same kind of locking clasp. Not a single one of the journals bore a serial number or any kind of identifiable mark. Peter began to wonder, was it possible that a universal key could open them all? A new thought occurred to him, prompting him to pivot toward the shelf beneath the telephone. He grabbed the directory and started flipping through its pages. In under a minute, he found what he was looking for: Coombs Specialties. It was already 8:35 p.m., and he debated whether the store might still be open. Many downtown businesses extended their hours midweek. After 2 rings, someone picked up. "Coombs Specialties, how may I help you?" The voice belonged to a young woman. She sounded warm, approachable, genuinely eager to assist. "Hi," Peter began. "I heard you carry red leather journals around 6 by 8 inches. Do you happen to have any available? I'm looking to buy one as a gift." "I think I know which ones you mean," she replied cheerfully. "Give me a moment, I'll go check." She was gone for close to 3 minutes. When she came back on the line, she confirmed, "We have 2 left in stock." Peter asked if they'd be open for a while longer, and upon hearing they'd remain open until 10, he threw on his coat and headed out. He couldn't shake the hope that one of those journals might match Grace's, and that maybe, just maybe, the key inside would fit hers. It was a long shot, but trying to force one open and potentially damaging it wasn't something Grace would ever forgive. Less than half an hour later, he was back home, holding a newly purchased red leather diary and a small key that came with it. The price tag, nearly $60, didn't faze him. If it helped him uncover what had been bothering Grace, it was money well spent. Worst-case scenarios had already started playing out in his mind. Chief among them was the fear she might be seriously ill. He remembered when she had quietly panicked over an abnormal PAMP test result, choosing not to confide in him until the ordeal was over. That had turned out to be nothing, but the memory still haunted him, especially since she'd had a mammogram just last fall. There was also the situation at her workplace. The growing tension between faculty members might have been wearing on her. He knew she wouldn't share those frustrations with him. Grace prided herself on handling professional problems on her own terms. But a darker worry crept in, a possibility he didn't want to name. Was she seeing someone else? He tried to shut it out, like so many husbands who dread the truth, but can't stop circling it. Still, their relationship wasn't exactly ordinary. Peter was slightly shorter than Grace, with neat blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. He had a compact, muscular build, while she moved with a statuesque grace. Their connection traced back to high school, where they'd gone on a few dates. After graduation, they'd taken separate paths. He entered an electrician's apprenticeship, and she headed off to college, eventually earning a graduate degree. Fate brought them together again years later, during a birthday party for a mutual friend in their final year of school. The spark was instant. A month after she graduated, they got married. By then, Peter had finished his training and had just made a down payment on a modest starter home. That little house served them well for 5 years. But as Grace's career progressed and Peter's work became steady, they moved into a more spacious home. They'd begun to talk seriously about starting a family, 1 or 2 children, they thought, and had decided Grace would stop her birth control at the end of the academic year. Back at the house, Peter remained unsure whether the new key would actually fit any of Grace's journals. It was a tiny thing, tucked inside a brown envelope within the diary's box. He began to second-guess his plan. Maybe he should have asked the shop clerk if the keys were universal. Still, he had already made up his mind. If this key didn't work, he'd abandon the idea. If each journal had a unique lock, he wasn't about to turn the place upside down searching for hidden keys. Within 5 minutes of getting home, he was seated at the kitchen table, a cold can of Coke beside him, and a small pile of journals laid out. The delicate key rested in his palm as he focused on the 7th diary, the one that seemed most recently used. He understood that the second he turned the key, there'd be no taking it back. It would be a violation, crossing into something Grace clearly meant to keep private. He paused, the weight of his decision heavy. If he got caught, would she ever trust him again? Still, concern gnawed at him, steadily overwhelming his guilt. He placed the key into the lock. It slid in smoothly, turned easily, and gave a soft click. Seconds later, the journal was open in his hands, flipped to the last entry. The top of the page bore yesterday's date. About 3/4 of it was filled with neat, measured handwriting. Peter read quickly, her words sinking in fast. By the time he reached the end, the color had drained from his face. He didn't move. His expression went slack, and his eyes shimmered with forming tears. Silently, he got up, grabbed the Coke, and wandered over to the sink. He stared through the window, gripping the can so tightly the aluminum crumpled beneath his fingers. He didn't even notice the soda spilling onto his hand until the coldness snapped him out of it. Letting the crushed can drop into the sink, he washed the sticky residue away. After drying his hands with a paper towel, he gathered the journals and the key, then walked into the living room. He placed everything on the end table next to the recliner, switched on the lamp, and sat down. Once settled, he picked up the unmarked 7th journal and carefully opened it to the first page. He had always known how the story ended. What remained unclear was how it had all begun. Just a single page had been enough to demolish his belief in their perfect marriage, and in the woman he thought he understood. Now, he was desperate to reconstruct the path that led there, clinging to the hope that her journal would illuminate the way. Instead of working backward, from the end to the beginning, he decided to follow the timeline naturally, starting from the first entry. At one moment, the impulse to speed to the Sheraton and confront her in room 412 nearly overtook him. But he shook it off. It was a recipe for catastrophe. He could crash in his rush to get there, or worse, lose control of himself if he did. Calling her was no better. Just hearing her voice might shatter his fragile composure, and he refused to let that happen. He wouldn't allow himself to fall apart. The earliest entry dated back to early June, just over half a year ago. He dove in, reading carefully, scanning every word for some explanation that might make sense of the painful truth he now knew. Yet all he found in those summer entries was a portrait of a joyful woman, fulfilled in her career, secure in her marriage, and content with her life. She wrote about gratitude, professional satisfaction, and the love she felt for her husband. On the surface, it should have comforted him, maybe even filled him with pride. But knowing what lay ahead, each warm sentiment cut like a blade. The knowledge of the ending corrupted everything that came before, making it impossible to read without feeling betrayed. Then he reached the entry dated September 8th, the first tremor before the fault line split. He leaned back and read the paragraph again, then again. September 8th. Dear Diary. Today I met my new teaching assistant. He stopped by my office to introduce himself. He's slightly taller than me, maybe by an inch or two, with dark hair, intense eyes, and a neatly trimmed beard. His name is Adam Russo. There's something oddly familiar about him, like someone I've seen in a movie. He handed over his academic transcripts, solid credentials. From that moment forward, Peter read more closely, watching for any mention of Adam Russo. The following entries focused on her academic life: classroom duties, student interactions, minor anxieties about managing a large class. Nothing seemed unusual, just the journal of a committed and enthusiastic professor. September 15th. Dear Diary, Adam has been a big help with the large class. While I organize my lecture materials, he handles student questions. It's amusing. Some of the girls seem a little too interested in him. I overheard two of them whispering as they left, saying he looks like Leonardo DiCaprio. Maybe that's why he seemed so familiar when we met. As the days passed in the journal, Adam's name began to appear more frequently. Peter slowed his reading, pausing to reread entries that made his stomach turn. September 20th. Classes are going well, though a few students have dropped already, probably found it too hard. I've noticed Adam always sits near the front during my lectures, his eyes locked on me the entire time. Maybe I should give him more tasks, keep his focus where it belongs. September 24th. I had some free time this afternoon and was preparing new materials. Adam stopped by and offered to assist. We made good progress: copies, reading lists, the works. Later in the entry, she shifted gears, writing extensively about a conversation she had with Peter about their future and starting a family. It was the first time she had mentioned children. September 30th. While I was lecturing today, I noticed Adam staring again. I frowned, hoping he'd get the message, but he just smiled and kept watching. After class, that same group of female students surrounded him with questions. No one ever comes to me. It's clear who they're there for. Even so, I'm proud of the class's progress. I've taught before, but now, as a full professor, I feel an even greater responsibility for their learning. For several entries after that, there was no sign of Adam at all. Instead, she wrote with enthusiasm about her students, her lectures, and her satisfaction with how the semester was going. Underlying those reflections was a recurring theme: her desire to talk to Peter about their future. Peter remembered it well. At some point in the fall, they'd had a real conversation about having children. Grace had wanted to finish her first academic year as a full professor before starting that chapter, so they agreed to wait until spring ended. October 8th. I'm overjoyed. Peter and I have finally decided to start a family. I'll stop taking the pill once the spring term wraps up. I shared the news with Adam today. He seemed genuinely pleased. When we were in my office, he walked over, took my hand, pulled me up, and gave me a long, tight hug. It caught me off guard. When he didn't let go right away, I had to nudge him back and remind him that the office door was wide open. Anyone could have walked by. October 10th. Adam showed up in my office again today, and for the first time I felt uneasy. I didn't hear him come in. It was the sound of the door clicking shut that made me turn. Then I noticed he'd locked it. He smiled and said, "Now no one can see us." I told him firmly to unlock it, and to his credit, he did. He lingered for about 15 minutes before finally taking his leave. Now I can't stop replaying the sound of the lock clicking as he turned the key on his way out. What was he trying to say? October 11th. While I was drafting test questions for my introductory class today, Adam appeared unexpectedly. He offered to assist me, and I won't deny, his presence made the process significantly smoother. The topic of the locked door incident surfaced again, and he apologized. I told him it was nothing, and truly, I meant it. When I asked him why he seemed so interested in me, his response caught me completely off guard. He admitted he found older women more compelling than women his age. I reminded him that I'm married and satisfied with my life, though I'd be lying if I said his confession wasn't flattering. There's something undeniably exciting, albeit confusing, about knowing someone like him might find me more appealing than the younger women swarming the campus. October 13th. I had been hoping Adam might drop in again today, but he didn't. I was surprised by how disappointed I felt. I'd wanted to revisit our conversation, the one about his preference for older women. October 15th. Today, my office was unusually crowded with students when Adam arrived. I kept watching the clock, silently willing him to stay until the room cleared. But by the time the last student left, he was gone. October 16th. At last, I had a moment alone with Adam today. He asked me to shut the door so we wouldn't be disturbed, and I agreed. I pressed him to explain what exactly he found so attractive in women older than himself. He told me his first romantic experience had been with a 40-year-old widow who had once lived next door, and since then, younger women had felt childish and unsure in comparison. I tried to reassure him that I wasn't angry or upset. But instead of responding, he turned and walked out without saying a word. Looking back, I know I should have been more direct, set clearer boundaries. Peter found this portion of the journal especially upsetting. He thought Adam was unstable, but what unsettled him even more was how passive my reaction had been. He left the journal open on the armrest and went to get another soda. Soon he was back, reading on, feeling like the story unfolding in front of him was dismantling everything he believed about our marriage. October 20th. Late this afternoon, just as I was packing my things, Adam showed up at my office. He asked if I had a minute to talk. I told him I wasn't busy, and without hesitation, he stepped inside and quietly shut the door. When I asked him to leave it open, he didn't acknowledge the request, just moved closer. He took both my hands, met my eyes, and said I'd been on his mind constantly. Then he asked me for another kiss, one that would last longer. I agreed, thinking it might be the quickest way to get him to leave. It was a terrible misjudgment, one I now regret deeply. Not knowing what else to say, I awkwardly apologized for forgetting his birthday. He laughed and admitted it wasn't his birthday at all. It had actually been in July. I knew I should have been furious that he'd lied to manipulate the moment, but strangely, I found the lie oddly charming. He thanked me for something. I'm still not sure what. Something about him unnerves me. I can feel him slipping under my skin. I need to be more careful. His name didn't come up again in the following 3 entries. During those days, Grace had been busy, grading midterms for her largest class and working through stacks of student essays. Peter noticed that Adam's paper was missing from the batch, which struck him as odd. But the journal offered no explanation for his absence. October 30th. I was afraid to see the look in his eyes, the one that might tell me he knew everything. It started this afternoon when Adam walked into my office without knocking. I hadn't noticed him at first. I was absorbed in reading. "Hey," he said cheerfully, startling me. I looked up just in time to see him closing the door and turning the lock. I said nothing. He approached quickly and placed his hands on my shoulders, pulling me close before I could react. I couldn't find my voice. Shame held me frozen. I should have stopped him instantly, but some part of me shut down, as if a switch had been thrown. When I came back to myself, I pushed him away. He only smirked and said, "Don't pretend you didn't like it." I said nothing. "I knew it," he added. Eventually, I found the words to tell him to leave. He just grinned and said he'd see me tomorrow. It's becoming obvious that I'm losing control over this situation. Every day, he makes things more difficult, and I'm certain he's doing it on purpose. I've thought about coming clean to Peter, but I dread what that would mean. He wouldn't be able to look past how far I've let things go. And worst of all, I still find myself thinking about Adam. That day's journal entry focused solely on how Adam made her feel. As Peter read it a 3rd time, something inside him began to fracture. If Adam had walked into the room at that very moment, Peter wasn't sure he could have stopped himself from doing something rash. Until now, he had never believed himself capable of real violence. November 2nd. I think I've finally stopped obsessing over how I behave around Peter. That first evening after everything happened was unbearable. Every glance, every word from him made me feel exposed, like he could see right through me. At one point, he asked if I was okay. He said I seemed jumpy, more anxious than usual. I denied it, and he seemed to accept my answer without suspicion. What shocked me was how easy it was to lie to him. I never want to find myself in that position again. November 6th. It's been several days since I've had a private moment with Adam. He had been placed in a class where supporting my work was one of his duties, and I couldn't ignore the way his gaze often lingered on me longer than necessary. Each time our eyes locked, he would flash that suggestive smile, and I'm almost certain I blushed the first few times it happened. Lately, I've found myself anticipating what I'll do the next time he walks through my office door alone. November 8th. Adam stopped by this afternoon, but several students were already in my office. As he was about to leave, I happened to look up, and to my surprise, he leaned down and brushed his lips against mine, followed by that same familiar, knowing smirk. Fortunately, the others were turned away and didn't appear to notice, but I still felt exposed and wished he'd shown more discretion. Earlier this year, I was invited to attend a seminar series in Columbus. It seems worthwhile, and I'm seriously thinking about going, schedule permitting. I've already asked for a full information packet to be sent over. November 9th. Yesterday was another day I hesitate to revisit. Adam's behavior, along with my own, has left me deeply unsettled, and I can't shake the feeling that I need to take control before this spirals further. This morning, with some free time, I buried myself in work until I heard the unmistakable click of the door being locked behind me. I don't know how Adam always manages to come in unnoticed. I told him to unlock the door, but he didn't respond. When he tried to pull me up from my chair, I resisted. But the longer he persisted, the more my resistance waned. I told myself it was just another kiss, pretending that's all he wanted. When I finally gathered the clarity to break away, I shoved him aside and fled to the bathroom. Tears blurred my vision as I tried to compose myself, frantically checking the mirror, haunted by one question. What if Peter had walked in or found out? Adam entered the bathroom moments later. He saw how shaken I was, but instead of apologizing, he said he hoped it would happen again. And then he left. I should have told him never to come near me like that again, but I was frozen, overwhelmed. It wasn't until he was gone that I managed to collect myself. What shocked me the most was how normal I acted around Peter that evening. He came home, and we spoke as though nothing had changed. I didn't stumble or show a hint of unease. I acted like everything was perfectly fine. Peter reread the entry, eyes scanning every line about Adam, fury building each time he circled back. Eventually, he turned the page and kept going through Grace's diary. A full week passed in her writing with no reference to Adam, no mention of what had occurred. In fact, Peter detected a strange peace in her tone. November 17th. I don't know what's happening to me anymore. Adam's influence over me is something I never foresaw. Whether it's his rugged demeanor or something broken inside me, I feel powerless in his presence. This afternoon he showed up again and sat casually on the edge of my desk. I told him we needed to have a serious conversation about what happened last time. He agreed without hesitation. He stayed silent as I explained how inappropriate it was. I told him I was married, happily so, and that if anyone discovered this, it could destroy my career. He listened quietly, that same smirk never leaving his face. Once I had said all I needed to say, I leaned back, assuming I had finally made things clear, but something in his expression told me he wasn't finished. After a pause that felt far too long, he asked whether I wanted to lock the door, or if he should. I couldn't find the words to answer. Without waiting, he got up, shut the door, and turned the lock. Then he gestured toward the small leather sofa near the bookshelf. I don't know why I went with him. I just did. An hour later, he thanked me and left. We've stepped into dangerous territory, and I no longer know how to steer myself out. Part of me thinks I should remove him from his role, but another part insists it hasn't gone far enough to warrant that. Peter can never know. I'm lucky my office is high up, away from street-level windows. Maybe with time I'll calm down before I go home tonight. Peter found this entry nearly impossible to finish. The situation had clearly escalated, and he no longer believed he understood the woman he'd married. Now more determined than ever, he resolved to read every single page of Grace's journals, no matter how long it took. He flipped back and reread 2 entries again. By the time he looked up, it was after 2 a.m. Though drained, he couldn't bring himself to stop. Before diving back in, he picked up his phone and left a message with Atwood Electric, informing them he'd be taking the next day off for personal reasons. He didn't yet know how he was going to respond, but he knew life would not return to what it was. The love and shared future they once held had dissolved into something cold and hollow, replaced by anger and confusion. He stepped into the bathroom, grabbed the last Coke, and drained it. Then, walking to the fridge, he took out another. He wasn't tired, not really, and he knew it wasn't just the caffeine keeping him awake. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the betrayal now laid bare before him. Looking at his watch, he was stunned to realize it had only been 8 hours since he last spoke to Grace, back when his doubts were just beginning to form. November 22nd. Adam came by today, but I made a point to keep the desk between us. He didn't try to lock the door or move in closer. The guilt I've been carrying these past few days is overwhelming. I won't allow him to touch me again. I think he sensed my determination to maintain boundaries in our relationship. All I can do now is hope I don't lose that sense of control. In the days that followed, I made no additional notes about Adam. It was obvious he noticed Grace's upbeat demeanor as the end of the term approached. With only a short stretch of the semester left, she appeared eager for it to conclude. November 23rd. I brought up the upcoming seminars with Peter. He didn't object to me going. In fact, he even mentioned he might take time off work to attend with me. I'm still unsure. We could spend some downtime together between sessions. Later, Peter would come to understand that sometime between November 23rd and the middle of December, Grace's attitude about him accompanying her had changed entirely. He kept reading. November 25th. Adam came by the office today and asked if he could stop by my apartment. I firmly declined. He seemed unusually interested in whether Peter would be away overnight. Then he suggested we meet at his place on 2nd Avenue, the one he shared with a few other students. Again, I turned him down without hesitation. He shrugged and said I could call him if I changed my mind. His number was listed. Other than trying to coax me into seeing him off campus, he behaved as he normally would. I brought up the academic seminars I'd be attending soon, and he seemed genuinely engaged. I made it clear they were exclusive to faculty, but he just smiled knowingly. November 30th. What happened yesterday is almost too painful to put into words. I feel completely disoriented. I barely got any rest last night, and even Peter could tell something was wrong. I wish I could open up to him about what's tormenting me, but I can't. Lately, I've been dreaming about Adam. I don't love him, yet I keep replaying our past in my mind. Why can't I put this behind me? I stood there motionless as he shut and locked the door. I didn't make any effort to stop him. While we sat on the couch, a part of me was silently begging for it to end. After he left, I locked the door and got dressed with tears streaming down my face. How did I let this happen again? The rest of the day, I stayed in my office with the door locked, cycling between crying spells and frantic thoughts, trying to piece together how I ended up here. Maybe I need to see a therapist. Peter read her words, filled with guilt and despair, but couldn't find anything that justified her actions. It was clear she hadn't been coerced. The more he read, the heavier his heart became. He began to feel himself unravel, his gentle, upbeat nature giving way to something unfamiliar. He was changing into someone neither he, his family, nor Grace had ever known. December 3rd. This morning, Adam intercepted me in the hallway and asked if I'd reconsider visiting him. He said he wanted to spend time together in a proper bed. I told him bluntly that it was never going to happen, especially not somewhere we might be seen. I reminded him once more about my marriage, my job. He seemed to take it in, then quietly asked something else. He wanted to come with me to the January seminars. He'd seen the brochure for the Sheraton where the faculty would be staying, and claimed that the slots were already full for sociology professors. He said he'd pay for his own room if I'd agree to share my nights with him. I said no. As he turned to leave, he smiled as if he knew something and told me to think about it. I didn't answer, but the thought wouldn't leave me alone. Why is this still happening? Peter had to stop. His anger was boiling over. He began pacing through the living room, then went to the kitchen and cracked open a can of Coke. Beer crossed his mind, but he needed clarity. He already had a sense of where his next move would lead, but he needed to think it through. He walked back to the living room and picked up his journal. December 7th. Adam came by the office again this morning, just briefly, to say goodbye. He's flying home for the holidays after his exam tomorrow. He asked if I wanted him to come back early to attend the seminar with me. He said he could tell I hadn't made a final decision. To avoid answering, I told him to call in a few days. I hadn't decided yet. He grinned and said he'd ring me at the office soon. December 8th. Today I told Peter I thought it would be best if he didn't join me at the seminar. I proposed we plan a spring break cruise instead. We had talked about it before, so the idea wasn't completely out of nowhere. He wasn't thrilled with the switch, but in the end, he agreed. I feel terrible for lying to him about this. I still haven't fully decided whether I'll invite Adam, but I'm not ready to shut that option out. Ever since that afternoon in my office, I've found myself mentally replaying what took place on the couch, far more often than I care to admit. It puzzles me. I don't understand why the memory keeps resurfacing. Life with Peter is rich and deeply satisfying. We share real happiness together. Adam has always occupied a purely professional space in my world. I've never viewed him in any other light. There's no emotional connection between us, not really. Yet the thought of spending uninterrupted time alone with him has an undeniable allure. He's clearly confident and experienced when it comes to sex. Part of me is genuinely curious if he'll act on his bold ideas or simply let them fade into silence. December 12th. Adam called me at work this morning. He hasn't let the topic go. He still wants to come with me to Columbus. He suggested booking 2 hotel rooms side by side to avoid raising suspicion. His plan involves me pretending to be his sister, and both reservations being made under his name. He described it as flawless. He promised to follow up tomorrow to confirm everything was in place and said that once I'd made the booking, he'd call the hotel and put the expense on his card. Now I'm stuck with the decision. Do I knowingly betray Peter? December 14th. Adam phoned again today. He mentioned trying to get in touch yesterday, but I hadn't been in. I ended up making the hotel reservations just as he advised, although I felt a wave of guilt wash over me as I did it. We got rooms 412 and 414. He plans to call today and charge his card for room 414. He sounded excited, almost giddy. I wouldn't say I share his enthusiasm, but some part of me is looking forward to it too. Adam's time here is almost up. He'll be gone after the spring semester, no longer part of the TA program. I honestly hope that once the weekend at the Sheraton is over, I'll lose whatever impulse draws me to him. I still can't quite pinpoint what it is about him that stirs me. Attractive men have shown interest in me before, but none of them tempted me like this. Maybe it's just that he seems to instinctively know how to push the right buttons, or at least I believe he does. God, I hope Peter never finds out. It would shatter him, and he's done nothing to deserve that. There were several other entries that month, though only one mentioned Adam or the arrangement Grace had made with him to spend 3 nights at the Sheraton. He'd apparently reached out to her again just after Christmas. December 28th. Adam called the house yesterday. His voice caught me off guard, but I was grateful Peter happened to be at work when he did. Adam said he'd been ready in case a man answered. He had a cover story ready, planned to ask for Veronica. He just wanted to confirm I was still going through with it, as he needed to book his return flight before New Year's. I told him I'd bring him along, and he was clearly thrilled. I tried to sound distant, but the truth is, I felt a flicker of anticipation too. Oddly, part of me sees this as a way of shaking him off. Before I met Peter, I never spent more than 2 consecutive nights with any man. Maybe that's what drew me to this plan, to see what it would feel like. I can only hope it leaves me unsettled enough to snap out of it. Peter glanced at the clock. It was nearly 5 a.m. The next entry had been the first he'd discovered, the one that started all of this. He was almost through the last of Grace's journals now, though he'd already made up his mind to read everyone. So far, nothing he'd seen confirmed she had actually gone through with the affair, but he needed clarity. He needed to know if someone else, anyone else, could carry some of the blame. There were still 100 things to do that day, but for now he set the book aside and walked to the kitchen to start the coffee. There would be time to sleep later. With the warmth of the mug in his hands, he returned to the living room and turned to that last page once again. January 3rd. It's all happening tomorrow. 3 full nights with Adam, and 3 days of academic sessions. I'll swing by his place before heading out of town and probably drop him off when we return. Thank goodness Peter didn't insist on coming along. I have no idea what excuse I could have given him. He even printed a map for me so I wouldn't get lost during the drive. This afternoon, while he was still at work, I looked up the mall next to the Sheraton and found out there's a Victoria's Secret there. I'm thinking of buying a few things to wear for Adam, and I'll make sure to wash them before ever wearing them again for Peter. That thought doesn't sit well with me, but at least Peter won't ever know. I forgot to remind Adam to bring condoms. I'm not willing to take any chances with Peter's health. If he forgets, we'll just make a quick stop at the pharmacy near the lingerie shop before heading to the hotel. This whole thing still feels strangely unreal, especially how much I'm looking forward to it. At the same time, I worry that Adam might expect things I've never done with Peter. That unsettles me. I don't want Peter asking questions I can't answer. If it ever comes up, I'll save anything new for the cruise and say I was just feeling spontaneous. I've already started packing, and I just hope Peter doesn't notice anything odd. The last thing I want is to give him a reason to be suspicious. Now that I've reread everything I wrote today, I can't stop wondering, am I really capable of going through with this? What transpired in my office felt anything but accidental. If anything is going to unfold between Adam and me on this trip, it won't be spontaneous. It will be premeditated. There's absolutely no way I could frame it, even to myself, as a simple mistake or moment of weakness. Technically speaking, I still have the option of calling it off and reimbursing Adam for his travel and lodging. But honestly, that feels like a moot point now. Just the thought of it sends waves of anticipation through me. Peter had just completed an entry in his 7th journal, cradling a mug of coffee as he mentally reviewed the events of the past 9 hours. Leaning back into his chair, he began formulating a plan that would carry him through the next 72 hours. He had made up his mind. His marriage was over. Even if Grace backed out of whatever she had arranged with Adam, Peter was certain the damage couldn't be undone. The idea of trying to fix things seemed laughable. As the hours passed, his affection for Grace seemed to fade, while his animosity toward Adam grew sharper by the minute. Around midday, Peter left his computer and retrieved the cordless phone from the kitchen counter. Back at his desk, he checked the number displayed on his screen and began to dial. Parker Investigations. How may I help you today? The woman's voice was clear, composed, and professional, a tone Peter noticed instantly. I'm wondering if you handle cases related to divorce, he asked, uncertain of the best way to describe the service he was after. It likely fell under the umbrella of marital investigations. If you're asking whether we investigate infidelity, yes, that's one of our specialties, she replied. Would you like to speak directly with an investigator? There was something about her calm demeanor that reassured Peter. Yes, I'd like that. I believe this is something I'm ready to move forward with. As he was transferred, soft rock music filled the line for about 30 seconds before a man picked up. This is James Parker. I understand you're looking for evidence for a divorce situation. How can I assist? The same professional cadence was there, and Peter didn't hesitate. I have reason to believe my wife is currently with another man at the Sheraton by the airport, he began. I need photo documentation, and I'd like to know what that would cost. He didn't have all the specifics ironed out yet, but he hoped he could provide enough for the investigator to get started. The Sheraton, right? That's within our capabilities, Parker confirmed. Is this taking place now? What sort of time frame are we working with? Peter exhaled and began explaining the situation. She's already checked in. She'll be there until Saturday morning. Her room is 412, and the man she's with is in 414. They're connected rooms. They were there last night too, but I didn't decide to act until this morning. Supposedly, she's attending a seminar, and he tagged along. He wasn't sure whether Parker would catch the insinuation in tagged along, but the man chuckled, suggesting he had. I'll need a few more details, Parker said. And what kind of documentation are you hoping to receive? Peter gave a physical description of Grace and offered to send a photo if it would help. Since he had found the agency through their website, he was reluctant to spend time emailing back and forth. He also provided Adam's full name and described him with whatever limited information he had gathered from Grace's journals. This sounds straightforward, Mr. Daly, Parker assured him. We can place discrete cameras in both rooms later today and leave them until they check out. Setup is quick, a few minutes tops. We've already confirmed access to those rooms through a contact at the Sheraton for a fixed fee. As long as you don't need constant live monitoring, we don't charge by the hour. For photographic evidence only, our flat rate is $800. You mentioned using cameras. Wouldn't just one suffice? Peter asked. I don't need full surveillance, just clear proof they spent the night together. Honestly, tonight is the main focus. If you can get images confirming that, I'd like them by tomorrow evening. Peter hadn't completely thought through the logistics or what exactly he should be requesting. We won't know ahead of time which room they'll actually use, Parker explained. That's why both need to be covered. And considering the equipment involved and our coordination with hotel staff, the pricing is more than reasonable. We'll also pay the hotel contact $100 total, once to install, once to remove. Right. I didn't think it through. This is all new to me, Peter admitted. You need payment in advance, I assume? I can pay with a credit card through your website if that works. He was committed now. Parker's confident, no-nonsense attitude gave him no reason to delay or complicate matters. Paying through the website seemed like the cleanest, fastest option. When you fill out the form, be sure to include case number 1372A, Parker instructed. That'll make sure our accounting team tracks it properly. As soon as your payment is confirmed, we'll get started with installation. You'll receive a DVD with all the footage we collect. I'll need your full name and mailing address to ship the DVD. To Peter, the request made perfect sense, but receiving the disc in the mail wouldn't do him much good right now. Would you mind hanging on to it for the time being? I'll reach out when I'm ready. What I need more urgently are some photographs, something that clearly indicates they're seeing each other. I'm not asking for anything graphic, just evidence that clearly shows they're involved. Email them to me tomorrow and I'll take care of printing them myself. You got it, Mr. Daly. I can pull still images straight from the video. I'll file the DVD away with your case until you tell me otherwise. While they spoke, Peter provided his cell number and paid the investigator with his credit card. Once the payment went through, the investigator promised that the surveillance gear would be in place without delay. With that reassurance, Peter finally let himself unwind. He stretched out on the couch and quickly fell asleep. He woke up in the late afternoon, feeling more rested and unmistakably hungry. After warming up and eating a slice of leftover pizza, he settled into a chair, opened the first of 6 completed journals, and began reading. This time he read fast, no pausing, no second reads, no deep reflection. By the time he finished the first journal and got up to stretch, it was nearly 10 p.m. Just then, his phone rang. It was Grace. To his surprise, the conversation went smoothly. Neither of them gave any indication that they were hiding anything. As he ended the call, Peter found himself wondering, did deception come as easily to her as it now did to him? With everything falling into place, staying calm and focused was surprisingly easy. Still, a question lingered. Would he ever feel normal again? Before diving into the second journal, he reviewed his checklist. Friday's tasks would be more involved. He had to stop by the bank and finish sorting his finances. He'd already given notice to Atwood Electric and was expecting his final paycheck the next day. Finishing the second journal took him well past 1 a.m. This one took longer, not because of the content, but because of the gnawing feeling growing in his chest. He couldn't shake the thought that, while he read, Grace and Adam might be together at the Sheraton. Time and again, his mind drifted to vivid, imagined scenes of their betrayal. Eventually, weariness set in, and he gave up on staying awake any longer. He couldn't bear to sleep in the bed he once shared with Grace, so the couch became his resting place once again. To his surprise, he managed a few decent hours of sleep, waking around 7 a.m. feeling somewhat renewed. After a simple breakfast, he turned his attention to the third journal. By noon, he had completed both the third and fourth volumes and put them aside to focus on the day's obligations. His first stop was Atwood Electric, to collect his final paycheck and clear out his things. Grant Atwood, the owner, seemed genuinely sorry to see him go and tried to talk him out of leaving. But once Peter gave a short explanation, Grant accepted it, shook his hand, and offered his best wishes. He even convinced Peter to keep the door open in case things ever changed. His next destination was the bank, where paperwork slowed everything down. By the time he left, he carried a cloth bag containing just over $20,000, the full amount he could withdraw from both joint and personal accounts. It was less than he had hoped for, but getting more would have required Grace's approval. Still, it would be enough to take care of the immediate future. When he returned home, it was nearly 4 p.m. He went straight to the answering machine. There was a message from Parker Investigations. Bracing himself, Peter called James Parker directly. "James Parker speaking. How can I assist you?" "This is Peter Daly. I'm calling you back. Did the setup go as planned? Any developments?" "Yes, Mr. Daly," Parker responded. "We installed the surveillance cameras in both rooms yesterday afternoon. I reviewed the video footage shortly after noon today. Since the rooms were vacant when we arrived, we were able to install everything quickly." Peter hesitated. Was there anything important on the footage? He could barely breathe as he waited for the answer. "I'll be honest, Peter, your instincts were spot on. We've documented everything you'll need if you decide to pursue divorce proceedings. They spent the night together in your wife's hotel room and were intimate several times. I've compiled all the footage onto a DVD, ready for pickup whenever you need it. You also mentioned wanting 3 specific still shots. I can email those if you're still interested." Hearing it out loud stirred something deep. Tears welled up in Peter's eyes. He hadn't expected to feel them. Even after everything he'd already read, having concrete proof made the betrayal feel far more real. "Yes, please send them," he said quietly. "Thank you, Mr. Parker. If everything's paid for, then I believe we're all set." "Yes, the payment has been made," Parker confirmed. "You don't sound quite like you did yesterday. Are you all right? News like this, it's a heavy blow. I just want to be sure you're holding together." Peter had composed himself, though a faint undercurrent of strain lingered in his tone when he said, "I'm all right. Thanks. I'll reach out if I need anything else." He added, "I'm assuming your attorney will want that DVD, unless you're planning to pursue something other than adultery as grounds. Either way, we'll hold on to it for a year or until we hear from you." A brief silence followed. "You know," the man continued, "a lot of my clients have found therapy useful in cases like this. It's not my area, but having concrete proof, like that video, often helps bring things into focus. A good therapist might really guide you through this." Peter responded evenly, "No need to worry, Mr. Parker. I know what steps I need to take. Thanks for your help." He ended the call before Parker could say another word. His face settled into a blank mask, betraying none of the turmoil beneath. He stayed seated at the kitchen table until the soft ping of the computer announced new mail. Rising quietly, he made his way to the office and opened the message from Parker Investigations. Attached were 3 photos. He clicked through each one before sending them to the printer, which was already stocked with glossy 8x10 paper. Within moments, the evidence of Grace's infidelity was in his hands. As expected, none of the photos were overtly graphic. Still, one image struck him like a blow. It showed the 2 of them under a bedsheet, positioned just carefully enough to avoid revealing too much. That single picture said more than words ever could. It sealed something inside him. He looked over the prints once more before placing all 3 into a brown envelope resting on the desk. Then he set the envelope on the kitchen table and returned to the chair where he'd spent the better part of the last 2 days. He picked up the 5th of Grace's diaries. By the time midnight crept in, he'd finished reading the final 2 journals. Now, with all 6 volumes read, he sat still, struck by how closely Grace had matched the version of her he'd always believed in. Not a single entry hinted at the deception he'd uncovered. Yet the journals weren't without revelations. Scattered throughout were glimpses, small, intimate details that reframed pieces of their past. He saw now that Grace had been more emotionally vulnerable than he'd realized. Her eagerness to reconnect had been sincere, and it was she who had pushed for his presence at the party where their story reignited. The intensity of reading those last entries had dulled his sense of time. He only noticed how late it was when he realized she hadn't called and that he was starving. He made a basic sandwich and poured a soda, all while replaying the memory of Grace and Adam, their bodies close, their betrayal intimate. The scene ran endlessly in his mind, denying him any peace and further solidifying the resolve that had been crystallizing over the past 48 hours. Whether it was the late meal or the emotional weight of those images, sleep came in fits. Every time his eyes closed, the photographs returned, vivid and cruel. At 7 a.m., he gave up on rest entirely and rose to face the day he'd been anticipating. There was a great deal to take care of, and he decided to get an early start. By 8:30, he made a call to the only close family member still in his life, his brother, Samuel. Though they weren't estranged, their bond wasn't particularly strong. Outside of Christmas gatherings, they rarely connected. Still, it had only been 2 weeks since Samuel, his wife Mary, and their children, 12-year-old Scott and 10-year-old Brooke, had visited. Samuel sounded a bit caught off guard when Peter said he wanted to stop by that morning, but fortunately, their day was free. Peter kept himself occupied with minor chores until he pulled up at Samuel's place a little after 10. Knowing the kids were probably eager to get back to their Saturday routines, Peter gathered them in the kitchen, where he joined Samuel at the table, and Mary stood brewing coffee. Recalling a conversation from the holidays about their upcoming spring break trip to Disneyland, Peter handed each child a crisp $100 bill. Their faces lit up as they wrapped him in grateful hugs, bubbling with excitement. "You didn't have to do that," Samuel said warmly. "That was incredibly generous of you. They're over the moon." "How have you been anyway?" he asked. "Did you win the lottery or something?" Peter gave a faint smile. "Nothing like that. Just felt like spreading a little joy." The three adults sat around the table, sipping coffee and making light conversation. Eventually, Mary mentioned something Grace had shared with her. "I guess it's not a secret anymore. You two planning a family?" She seemed thrilled. "Having kids is a blessing. I'm sure you'd love it." Peter hesitated briefly before replying. "She told you that, huh?" He gave a small nod. "I suppose there's not much women don't tell each other." Before Mary could respond, he went on. "Hard to say how those plans will pan out. Life's funny like that. It tends to throw you a curveball." He smoothly redirected the discussion, asking Samuel how things were going at the restaurant he managed. Once the coffee cups were empty, Peter stood. "Just in case I don't see you before the holidays," he said. "I hope everything goes smoothly." He shook Samuel's hand, gave Mary a quick hug, and added, "I'll keep you all in my thoughts." Without further explanation, he stepped outside, and the family watched quietly from the doorway as he drove away. As his car disappeared down the street, Samuel turned to Mary. "Did you get the sense something was bothering him?" he asked. He looked like he had a lot on his mind, but didn't want to open up. Mary offered a quiet shrug. "Maybe he's just keeping himself occupied while Grace finishes that course she signed up for." She had mentioned she'd be gone until later that night. The pair wandered leisurely back toward the house, their fingers laced together, exchanging light conversation about how they'd spend the rest of the day. At a few minutes before 6, Grace Daly's car pulled into the driveway. She paused, slightly puzzled to see that Peter's vehicle wasn't there. Entering through the kitchen side entrance, an inexplicable unease brushed over her. She had envisioned their reunion in her head, imagined how she'd smile, how the embrace would feel, but the stillness that greeted her inside felt oddly hollow. Yet a part of her had suspected he might not be home yet. In truth, the quiet gave her a sliver of relief. It meant she could take a moment to unwind, unpack, and toss her travel-worn clothing directly into the wash. She stood in the hallway, weighing whether a second shower was necessary, unsure if the one she took that morning had successfully erased every trace of Adam. As she moved past the kitchen table, something caught her eye, a folded note pinned down beneath the salt shaker. Recognizing Peter's handwriting, she unfolded the paper and read, "Grace, Grant called early, urgent job in Centerville. I'm stepping in for him. It's overtime, so that helps. I'll be back tomorrow afternoon. Peter." A small wave of disappointment rippled through her. Still, the delay gave her breathing room to collect her thoughts, tackle chores, and prepare for the inevitable conversation. She placed the note back on the table, grabbed her suitcase, and headed upstairs. Halfway up the steps, She made a snap decision. Instead of another shower, she'd treat herself to a long, soothing bath. Inside the bedroom, she emptied her suitcase into the laundry bin, turned to leave, then froze. Her eyes landed on her journal resting atop the tall dresser. She instantly remembered stuffing it into her emergency bag on Wednesday. Retrieving it, she felt a subtle wave of comfort. It hadn't been disturbed. She had intended to document everything during the trip, but in the end, she'd forgotten about it entirely. With the journal now in hand, she tucked the bag back on the shelf and carried the diary downstairs, deciding to write while the washing machine did its work. As the laundry spun, scrubbing away the last physical remnants of her time with Adam, Grace prepared herself something simple: a sandwich paired with a bowl of soup. Once she'd finished eating, she left the dishes in the sink and picked up the phone to dial Peter's number. She hit the speed dial and waited, only to hear the familiar ringtone chirping across the kitchen. It was coming from the woven basket on the table, the one where they both habitually dropped their phones, keys, and spare change. With a sigh, she hung up and reached into the basket to retrieve his phone. "Wonderful! How am I supposed to reach you now?" she muttered to herself, not expecting an answer. Returning to the table, she placed the journal in front of her. From her wallet, she retrieved a tiny brass key tied to a piece of red yarn. She unlocked the diary, turned to a clean page, and began writing. January 7th. The past 4 days have been a whirlwind, messy, emotional, and impossible to forget. I need to write it all down now while it's still sharp in my mind, even the parts I'd rather not remember. When I picked Adam up, he was practically buzzing with excitement. During the drive, he kept trying to touch me, which irritated me far more than I anticipated. Eventually, I told him someone might recognize me if they saw us. That quieted him. As we got farther from the city, I started to relax. By the time we arrived, I found myself warming to the attention he lavished on me. We stopped at the mall before checking in at the Sheraton. While he dashed into a pharmacy, I slipped into Victoria's Secret for a quick look. To my surprise, he was back at my side in no time, as if he'd run to find me. He gave his thoughts on several sets, and I bought one he favored and 2 that I personally liked. That first night, I wore the one he chose, but I made sure to toss it into the hotel's trash before we checked out. It went into an empty bag and straight into the bin. I couldn't stand the thought of bringing it home. I couldn't risk Peter ever laying eyes on something picked out by someone else. I've decided to throw the other 2 away as well. They're beautiful, yes, but contaminated, tainted by what they represent. I want no reminders. That night, Adam came to my room and everything happened quickly between us. But afterward, as we lay side by side, a sobering truth hit me. Sex doesn't equal love. I told him then and there that it was over. There would be no second night. What had once felt thrilling now felt hollow. I started to miss the comfort, the sincerity of being with Peter. Still, I didn't want to provoke a scene, so I stayed silent until bedtime. When I finally said I was done, he flew into a rage, and for a brief, alarming moment, I felt a flicker of fear. But it was late, and the confrontation fizzled. We both fell asleep, though I was already making plans to mend things with my husband. Friday morning, I woke to him attempting to initiate things again. I resisted. I reminded him what I had said the night before. He didn't listen. When he was finished, he returned to his own room, and I locked the door that connected our suites. Through the door, I told him to stay away. His answer was cold. He said he'd find someone else. He added that I wasn't the only female sociology professor attending the conference. That evening, at the final dinner, I saw him with another woman, someone I'd noticed at several of the sessions. I recognized her face. She was married, too. She looked just as drawn to him as I had once been. The rush of relief that surged through me, knowing I wouldn't have to spend another night with him, is hard to describe. Later, I heard them enter his room together. Lying alone in bed, everything finally made sense. Adam wasn't interested in connection. He targeted older women he thought he could manipulate. To my deep and lasting shame, I became one of the women he successfully deceived. I had expected the return drive with him to be agonizing, but to my surprise, the ride passed without incident. Now that I could finally see Adam for who he really was, I found myself capable of guiding the conversation and setting firm boundaries. It was as if he had already taken whatever he wanted from the situation. He was unusually polite, even calm. When I told him I didn't intend to see him again, he didn't argue. In that moment, I sensed that he realized his grip on me had finally broken. During the ride, I had plenty of time to think, and I've already made the decision to contact a therapist first thing Monday morning. I owe it to Peter never to betray him again. To prevent history from repeating itself, I need to understand how I ever allowed Adam to gain such power over me. There's something within me, something broken, that I need to face and repair. Whatever vulnerability led me into that shameful situation needs to be addressed, whether by healing it or removing it altogether. I'd sooner die than allow myself to fall prey to such weakness again. I've also made a personal promise. I'll devote the rest of my life to making things right with Peter. Even if he never finds out what happened, the weight of this secret is mine alone to bear, and I pray he never learns of it. One more choice I've made. If Peter agrees, I'll stop taking my birth control pills when this current pack ends in 12 days. Lately, the idea of having children has taken root in my mind, and I see no reason to keep waiting. After finishing the lengthy journal entry, Grace slid her pen between the pages and gently placed the diary on the table. Then she went upstairs to prepare for a bath. She brought the cordless phone with her, just in case Peter decided to call. Once the tub was filled, she added a few drops of fragrant bath oil, lit some candles, and slowly immersed herself in the warm water. The heat relaxed her, and she let her eyes close, finally allowing herself a moment of peace. She was nearly asleep when a sudden, inexplicable feeling made her think someone was watching her. Her eyes opened slowly, and she turned toward the bedroom, but saw no one. Shaking off the eerie sensation, she leaned back and let her mind drift to thoughts of how she might begin to make amends for the reckless affair with Adam. An hour later, refreshed and clear-headed, she came back downstairs. She tossed a load of laundry into the dryer, then returned to the kitchen to reread what she'd written in her journal. But something gave her pause. The pen she thought she'd left inside the diary was missing. Moments later, she spotted it resting next to the wicker basket on the table and figured she must have forgotten to tuck it back in. She picked it up, reopened the journal, and started reading. Sunday morning brought Grace a sense of clarity and new beginnings. She spent the early hours straightening the house, followed by a shower and dressing in an outfit she knew Peter loved. By mid-afternoon, she sat at the kitchen table sipping coffee while a roast cooked in the oven. Her peaceful moment was interrupted by a knock at the side door. Startled, she went to answer it, and was unsettled to see two tall men standing outside. One was a uniformed officer, his hand resting on the gun holstered at his side. The other, a slightly older man in a suit and overcoat, held up a badge. "I'm Detective Rankin, and this is Officer Reynolds," the suited man introduced himself. "We're with the Springfield Police Department. We're looking for Peter Daly. Is he here?" Relief softened Grace's features. "No, Peter's at work right now," she said quickly. "When I saw you at the door, I feared something had happened to him. I'm his wife, Grace. Maybe I can help." The two men exchanged a glance. "Would you mind if we came in?" the detective asked. "It's pretty cold out here." "Of course," she replied, stepping aside. "Come in." She led them into the kitchen and asked, "What's this about?" "Why are you trying to find Peter?" Concern began to flicker across her face. "Is he all right?" No, nothing like that," the detective said quickly. "As far as we know, your husband is fine. We just need to ask him a few questions regarding an investigation." "Are you sure he's at work?" "Definitely," she answered, walking over to the counter and picking up a handwritten note. She handed it to the detective. "He left this for me. When I got back from my trip last night, it was sitting right here. You can read it." Officer Reynolds positioned himself near the kitchen counter, watching both the room and the back door, his hand still hovering near his weapon. Detective Rankin examined the note, then passed it to Reynolds. After a quick scan, the officer returned it. "Would you mind if we held on to this, Mrs. Daly?" the detective asked. "Not at all," she replied, and he slipped it into a folder inside his briefcase. Unable to contain her curiosity, Grace's voice trembled slightly as she asked, "Why exactly do you need to talk to Peter?" What could he possibly have to do with a police investigation? He's never been in trouble, not once. The detective's tone became more serious. This morning, we received a report of a homicide. A call came into our department reporting the murder. We traced the number the call came from. It belongs to your husband's cell phone. Right now, we're working with the phone company to pinpoint the location from which that call was made. Grace's expression shifted as relief washed over her. There must be some mistake, she said, almost laughing at the absurdity. I tried calling Peter last night right after I got home, but realized he'd forgotten his phone. It's been here the whole time. It's in that basket right there, she said, pointing to a wicker basket sitting on the kitchen table. The detective didn't hide his skepticism. Mind if I check his phone myself? Without waiting for permission, he approached the table, eyed the basket for a second, then lifted it and brought it over. There's no phone here, Mrs. Daly. His tone was steady, but there was a hint of curiosity beneath it. Are you sure you're not mixing up the days? Maybe it was another time you saw it there? Grace's expression shifted to shock. She stepped closer, checking the empty basket again with disbelief. She circled to where it had been placed, peering around the counter even though the absence of the phone was obvious. I swear it was here last night. I remember trying to call him from it, she said, her voice unsteady. Her gaze darted between the officer and the detective, clearly growing more distressed. I can't explain why it's not here now, the detective said calmly. But the call to report the incident came from your husband's number, and I have to treat that as fact. He opened a folder, quickly scribbled down some notes, and then looked back at her. Do you know someone named Adam Russo? The name visibly stunned her. Color drained from her face. I do, she replied slowly. But Peter, my husband, he doesn't. Adam worked as my teaching assistant last semester. The detective exchanged a brief, knowing glance with the officer beside him. So you're saying your husband never met Mr. Russo? They had no personal connection whatsoever? You're certain? He pressed. Grace's voice rose, her worry intensifying. Yes, Peter didn't know him. They never met. The detective made another note before meeting her eyes again. Well, he said cautiously, your husband apparently knew him well enough to be the one who made the call reporting his death. The statement hit her like a punch. She collapsed into a nearby chair, shaken. Adam is dead, she whispered. He was just with me. I dropped him off at his place around 12:30. How could he be dead? Detective Rankin took a seat across from her. His voice softened slightly. Can you describe your relationship with Mr. Russo? He asked. Any possible reason your husband might have had for wanting to harm him? Her complexion turned even paler. She hesitated. He was a high school student. My assistant. That's all there was. Peter he couldn't hurt him. But doubt had crept into her voice. The detective waited a beat before continuing. When we reached the address your husband provided, we found clear signs that someone assaulted Mr. Russo shortly after he entered the house. A suitcase was dropped in the hallway. There was broken glass and footprints, definite evidence of a struggle. He referred to his notes again before continuing. He was dragged into the kitchen and tied to a chair using plastic zip ties, commonly used for securing electrical wires. As he described the scene, silent tears slipped down Grace's face. He was shot in the leg, just above the knee, Rankin went on. The medical examiner suspects the bullet hit a major artery. He lost a considerable amount of blood before being moved. He paused, weighing his next words. Preliminary autopsy results show he was beaten and finally executed with a single bullet to the head. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, there was another bullet wound, fired into his groin. The coroner believes that one was inflicted post-mortem. We estimate time of death to be between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. Grace cut in, her voice strained and emotional. Peter didn't do this. He couldn't have. He doesn't have that in him. Her earlier fear had transformed into defiance. Rankin flipped a few more pages in his folder. State records indicate that your husband legally owns a .25 caliber semi-automatic pistol. One of the bullets we recovered at the scene, lodged into the chair, matches that caliber. He stopped again, letting the information settle. And now we need to talk about motive. He laid 3 photocopied pictures on the table. These were found near the victim's body, laid out on the floor. Blood splatter analysis confirms they were there at the time of death. He likely saw them just before he was shot. The detective stared directly at her. I don't think you've told us everything about your connection to Mr. Russo, or about what your husband might have known. Grace's fingers trembled as she picked up the photographs. As she studied them, her lips parted in horror. No, she whispered, her voice cracking. Peter couldn't have known about this. She broke down, sobs shaking her frame. At that moment, Rankin's phone buzzed. He answered quickly, murmured a few words while jotting notes, and ended the call in under 3 minutes. As he snapped the phone shut, Grace remained hunched over, hands covering her face. The sobbing hadn't stopped, but it had quieted. Rankin looked up from his notes. We've just verified the origin of the call made from your husband's phone. He let the silence build before finishing. It was placed from Windsor, Ontario. Local police searched the area and, with help from the phone company, located the device. It was inside a fabric bag, alongside your husband's credit cards, and a .25 caliber handgun registered in his name. The bag had been thrown away in a trash bin situated in the parking lot of a Walmart. There were no sightings of him or his car in the vicinity, yet investigators found license plates that matched those registered to his vehicle among the discarded items. Authorities theorized that he may have swapped plates with another car parked nearby to more easily blend in with Ontario traffic. This discovery offered no comfort to Grace. She was still deeply distraught, sobbing without restraint at her desk. The detective watched her silently for a while, then quietly reached into his folder and placed a new photocopy in front of her. It showed a small brass key lying next to a ruler for scale. The key's size and shape were clear in the image. We haven't identified what this key opens, the detective explained softly. Does it mean anything to you? Grace looked at the picture, then suddenly rummaged through her handbag. She pulled a key from her wallet and held it up beside the image. It was a perfect match. In that instant, whatever strength she had left crumbled. She fell back in her chair, overtaken by emotion. Barely audible, she murmured 2 words, "Diary. Peter." The investigators remained nearby, allowing her time to recover. They stayed with her for nearly 15 minutes, offering quiet support as she tried to regain her composure. Eventually, they encouraged her to call someone for support. After she confirmed that her sister was on the way, the detectives excused themselves and left. As they walked through the lot outside, Officer Reynolds turned and asked, "Do you think he'll be caught soon?" "That's going to depend on how well he can keep out of sight in the next couple of weeks," the senior detective responded. "He hasn't committed any crimes here in Canada, so local authorities might not be too motivated to pursue him." "He's not exactly a repeat offender," Rankin added. "If he manages to stay under the radar early on, his chances of slipping away for good go up. If 6 months go by and he's still missing, we could consider contacting one of those crime shows, like Most Wanted or something similar. Some of them actually have a decent success rate." Reynolds took that in silently, then shifted the subject. "What do you make of the phone?" he asked. "I believed her when she said it was there the night before," came the reply. "Same here," Rankin agreed. "She didn't come off as confused or dishonest. She seemed genuine." "My theory?" He returned, probably to follow through on whatever plan he originally had. But for whatever reason, he didn't go through with it. While he was back, he must have spotted the phone and took it with him before leaving again. Reynolds' brow furrowed. But why come back just to take a phone? Why not speak to her? Why vanish again? Detective Rankin came to a stop, turned toward Reynolds, and answered, "Put the pieces together. Peter Daly killed the man she was seeing. If he returned to the house, I highly doubt it was only to grab his phone. The only logical reason he'd come back would be to finish what he started, maybe take her life, maybe his own. I can't say for sure what made him change course, but I don't believe for a second that the phone was the real reason." Reynolds slowly nodded, the weight of the possibility settling in. "In time," he said quietly, "Mrs. Daly will realize just how close she came to dying. And when that moment comes, I wonder what she'll do with that knowledge."